Welcome back everyone, Mudford here. Today we're out in the shop working on the Honda 400EX. I've had a couple of videos on this. I bought this for a hair scramble quad and I've had to rebuild the engine and I added some cooling system upgrades to it. But other than that, it's pretty stock. It's got the Nerf bars on it that you need to have to race. And it's a fairly stock quad. Does pretty good. I finish towards the upper end of the C-class, and for an over 40 rider who's never raced before, I consider that pretty good. You'll see a lot of these at races because there's a lot of these 400EXs out there. I'd say it's the most popular quad at the hair scrambles. But today I'm working on a few upgrades. One of the biggest things that need upgrading is the suspension, and we are doing it the poor man way, the budget build. You can go and buy some $1,100 Elka shocks or up to $3,000 shocks for it. But that's not what we're doing because we are on a budget. Here's what we're putting on it. These are Honda 450R shocks. This is a good upgrade for it. And you can pick these up roughly for $200 to $250 on eBay when people pull them off when they upgrade their suspension. But I've been told this is a pretty good upgrade for these quads. Well, it's not a direct bolt in though. So the bottom will bolt in perfectly. The top has some clearance issues with this captured nut, and just the top of this here is too close. A couple ways you can go about fixing this. I see a lot of people do some grinding on the shock itself. I'm not a big fan of that because then if I change shocks or if these get wore out, if I buy new ones, then I'll have to do it again. So my plan is to get up in here and redo this, make it a little bit better. Weld some steel onto it, cut this out on the top here, and redo this. You can see mine isn't really working very good anyway, so I'll probably make some kind of a new bracket while I'm doing all this. What I've done so far is put the quad up on a jack stand. I should have pulled the shock loose first, but I started grinding on the mount and I nicked the top of the shock a little bit. But what I did was I took this part out and I'm setting it aside for now. I'm planning on putting a filler on that and welding this back in up a little bit. See the distance from the eyelet to the top of the shock here on the stock shock is much less than the distance here on the 450R shock. So we just got to come up with a little bit of clearance. So I think I'm just going to take this shock right out now and go ahead and mount the other shock in. Then I can figure out how much of a strip I need to add on the upper part of my mount. It is kind of flimsy without the reinforcement across the top, so it's kind of important to put that back. And you're going to want to have your nut for your captured nut here for your fender, so you have something to bolt your fender to. There's another little spot I had to trim out down here, just to notch it a little bit to get the shock to fit up in there, just because the shoulder on this is so much bigger. But it should go right in now. Yep, it fits right in now. Looks like it would fit fairly good. It's the nut that's going to hit the shock. But what we'll do is we'll raise it up a little bit and just give it that much more clearance. So here they are side by side. The length on them is pretty similar. The diameter of the metal for the coil seems to be the same, but the 450R is made into a bigger coil. The housing seems to be a little bit bigger, and the biggest thing is, of course, this has the remote reservoir, which will help a lot for the conditions that you usually ride a four-wheeler in of repeatedly compressing the suspension. I've repeatedly helped keep the shock cooler, the oil in the shock cooler, and make it work for longer periods of time for you. Here's what it looks like with the 450R shocks mounted. I'm going to go ahead, I think, and adjust the ride height and probably the stiffness a little bit, because what I'm going to do is back this. I think I'm going to back these off a little bit, take a little bit of the tension off the spring and lower the ride height. Maybe like a ½ inch, if that, and see if it makes the angle here a little bit less. We'll see how it rides like that. Found a piece of angle iron in the scrap pile. You can see I've cut on it quite a bit already. I'm going to cut like maybe a 1/4 inch strip. Then I'm going to wrap it around this piece, tack it on, and then see how it looks on there. And since I'm only going like a 1/4 inch, I probably won't even modify this piece. I don't think a 1/4 inch is going to hurt anything. Got my steel welded on. I didn't trim it yet because I can hold it better for when I'm welding it onto the quad frame. I'm going to go ahead and get the shock out of the way and then weld this in next. Here's the finished product. Welds aren't the best, but they're strong. I'm sure they'll hold fine. So the other side mount is done. The weld job isn't the greatest, but I'm just going to spray some gray paint over it. I'll do that tomorrow on both sides. I'm probably going to pull the expanded metal off and paint that too, and paint the mounts for that like I never did. And then we'll be ready to put this back together. Okay, the shock mounts are painted, shocks are in. I put my covers back over the springs and the shock. Got my oil cooler back down in place. And I also changed the mount for my steering dampener. So it is coming out here and it goes through the frame here now. It was clamped onto one of the pipes back there. So this is much better. Now all I really need to do is get the plastic ready to go back on and wire it up. Then I have to start working on the LT80.
These front fenders are all cracked. The mounts are all broke. There's not much left of them. It's plastic and it's supposed to mount on the metal piece that sits on the top of the shock mount that I just worked on. I think what I'm going to do is just cut this right off flush. I'm going to take a piece of metal and rivet it, a thin piece of metal, and rivet it right around there for support. And then I'm also going to drill, a couple of holes and put some type of a piece of angle in there to replace this. That way it'll be metal around for support underneath, and then metal here, and it should support this spot better than this. So I just got all that crap cut out of the way with the grinder, smoothed out. The previous owner had put all this stuff in. It was sort of like JB Weld. He was convinced it was fixed, but it didn't work worth a crap. So I put the red zip ties through to kind of hold things together, but I mean, it kind of worked, but still needs more. That's why we're going to try the metal. So I think this is what I'm going to end up using. This is just some sheet metal. I'm not even sure the gauge. It's flexible enough. I'm going to go ahead and cut it to the size I need. I'll probably clean it up, get it bent so it fits the contour of the plastic, and then paint it with some primer at least so it won't rust back up. And then I will, I'm not sure if I'm going to rivet it or bolt it.
I might use carriage bolts through the top, some small ones, or rivets. We'll see when I get to that point. Got my metal plates shaped, I think, how I want them. I think I'm going to go with some sort of a carriage bolt, just so I can draw it tight. I just don't trust a rivet. So my plan is to put 2 bolts here, with the nuts sticking out here and here. Then I'll have some sort of angle, not anything like this probably, this is pretty thick, but a piece of that bolted right here, which will bolt to my mounts. You can see I got the tin bent correctly now and bolted onto the plastic. Fits pretty good. And I went with stainless carriage bolts, so there's nothing really to get caught on. It's fairly smooth, and they're holding them with channel locks. Well, I used the impact to tighten the nut, and these are the plastic nylock nuts, so they shouldn't come off. Got my piece of metal about where I want it to be right now. I'm going to go ahead and trace it with a marker on here so I can figure out where to drill my hole. I think I'm only going to go with one hole through the metal and plastic, because it's just not really that wide of a piece that I have. So here's the side I have bolted on. Pretty solid. Here's the side I don't quite have bolted yet. You can see quite the difference. I'm used to the fenders flopping around and not being solid ever since I've owned it. So it's kind of nice to have it mounted fairly securely. So there's the bolt that goes through. So when I want to take the front fenders off, I just have to take these off, and of course the back ones. But that's the way it's going to mount.